There is a nightmare scenario that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. A scenario that intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv, Riyadh, and European capitals study obsessively. A scenario that would reshape the Middle East forever and send shockwaves through the entire global order. That scenario is a nuclear-armed Iran, and not just possessing nuclear weapons, but using them. Today we are going to analyze in meticulous detail exactly what would happen if that nightmare becomes reality. If after decades of sanctions, negotiations, sabotage, assassinations of nuclear scientists, diplomatic agreements that collapse, Iran finally crosses the red line, develops a nuclear weapon, and uses it against Israel, and how the United States, Israel's most powerful ally, would respond to that attack. What you are about to hear is not propaganda. It is not taking sides. It is a cold analysis based on real military capabilities, verifiable nuclear doctrine, Middle Eastern geography, and decades of official statement from the governments involved. We will follow this scenario hour by hour, from the exact moment Iran decides to launch to the consequences that would extend across the entire world. Because a nuclear conflict in the Middle East, however limited it attempts to be, never stays contained in the Middle East. Stay with me, because what is coming is the most complete analysis you will find about the nuclear scenario that non-proliferation experts consider one of the most likely to actually occur in the coming decades. Before we enter the hour-by-hour scenario, we need to establish the context deeply. And to understand this context, we must talk about history. Decades of history. Because Iran's nuclear program did not begin yesterday. It began in the 1950s. Ironically, with American help. In 1957, under President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, the United States helped the Shah of Iran establish a civilian nuclear program. The idea was to promote peaceful nuclear energy as an alternative to oil. Iran, under the Shah, was a U.S. ally in the region, a bulwark against Soviet expansion. Nobody in Washington imagined what would come next. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah. Ayatollah Khomeini took power. Iran went from being an American ally to what the Ayatollah called the Great Satan. Diplomatic relations were severed. They have never been fully restored. The nuclear program, which had been suspended during the chaos of the revolution and the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, was secretly reactivated in the 90s. Iran argued it needed nuclear energy to diversify its economy, that it had the right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. But the international community, especially Israel and the United States, was suspicious, with good reason. In 2002, a group of Iranian dissidents revealed the existence of undeclared nuclear facilities. At Natanz, a massive uranium enrichment plant built in secret. At Iraq, a heavy water reactor that could produce weapons-grade plutonium. The world discovered that Iran had been lying, that its program was not just peaceful, that it was developing the technical capabilities necessary to produce nuclear weapons. What followed were 2 decades of crisis, increasingly severe economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations, by the United States, by the European Union. Sabotage attempts. The Stuxnet virus, developed by the United States and Israel, destroyed thousands of Iranian centrifuges in 2010. Assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists on the streets of Tehran. Israeli airstrikes against convoys transporting nuclear equipment. Diplomatic negotiations that lasted years. The 2015 nuclear agreement, formerly called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was the most serious attempt to resolve the crisis. Iran agreed to severely limit its nuclear program, allow intrusive international inspections, and dismantle much of its enrichment infrastructure. In exchange, sanctions would be lifted. For a few years, it worked. International inspection agencies confirmed that Iran was complying. But in 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement, reimposed the most severe sanctions in history against Iran, promised maximum pressure to force a better deal. Iran responded by gradually increasing its uranium enrichment beyond the limits of the agreement. In 2020, the the United States assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Quds force, in a drone strike in Baghdad. Iran promise de revenge, launched ballistic missiles against American bases in Iraq. The region was on the brink of war. And now, in our scenario, we arrive at the year 2028. Diplomatic efforts to revive the nuclear agreement have completely collapsed. Western intelligence agencies report that Iran is weeks, perhaps days, from having enough highly enriched uranium to produce its first nuclear weapon. Israel has publicly declared it will never allow Iran to have the bomb. That all options are on the table, including military action. The United States has reiterated its commitment to Israel's security, has said that a nuclear Iran is unacceptable, but has also warned Israel against unilateral preemptive strikes that could drag the entire region into war. Tensions are at their highest point in decades. And then, in some underground bunker in the mountains of Iran, something happens that changes everything. To understand what is about to happen, we need to understand Iran's nuclear capabilities in this hypothetical scenario. Because Iran, unlike Russia or the United States or China, does not have an arsenal of thousands of weapons. In our scenario, Iran has managed to produce, in secret, 3 functional nuclear weapons. Only 3. But as we will see, 3 is enough to change the world. The weapons are simple fission design, similar to the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima in 1945. Estimated yield of approximately 20 kilotons each. They're not the massive thermonuclear weapons of hundreds of kilotons that the superpowers have. But 20 kilotons is more than enough to completely destroy the center of any city. The weapons were built using highly enriched uranium produced at the Natanz and Fordow facilities. The bomb design was probably assisted by North Korea, which has shared nuclear technology with Iran for decades, or perhaps by Pakistan through the AQ-CON network that proliferated nuclear technology in the 90s and 2000s. The 3 weapons are mounted on medium-range ballistic missiles, specifically Shahab-3 missiles, which have a range of approximately 1,300 kilometers, enough to reach any point in Israel from Iranian territory. Iran also has more advanced missiles, like the Sejal-2 and the Karamshar, but for this first nuclear attack, it uses the Shahab-3, which are the most tested and reliable in its arsenal. Now, the critical question: why would Iran use these weapons? What could push Iranian leadership to make the most extreme decision possible? In our scenario, the answer is a combination of factors. First, Iran is under the most severe economic pressure in its history. Sanctions have collapsed its economy. Inflation exceeds 100%. The rial has lost 90% of its value. There are shortages of medicines, basic foods, massive internal protests. The regime is in danger. Second, there is intelligence information, possibly planted, possibly real, that Israel and the United States are about to launch a massive military attack against Iran's nuclear facilities. An attack that would destroy decades of work and eliminate the only bargaining chip Iran has. Third, there is a faction within Iranian leadership, the most radical elements of the Revolutionary Guard, who have argued for years that the only way to definitively eliminate the Israeli threat is with a preemptive nuclear strike. That Israel is small, vulnerable, and that a successful attack could eliminate Iran's enemy in a single blow. And fourth, there is a belief, perhaps mistaken, perhaps suicidal, that the United States would not respond nuclear to an Iranian attack against Israel. That the United States would not risk New York for Tel Aviv. That nuclear deterrence would not apply because Iran did not directly attack the United States. This belief is fundamentally wrong. But in a regime under extreme pressure, with imperfect information, with hardliners in control, it is the type of catastrophic error that can occur. And in our scenario, it occurs. Hour 0, Monday, 3 in the morning, Tehran time. In an underground military facility in the Zagros Mountains in western Iran, the supreme leader, the Ayatollah who has final authority over all strategic decisions of the country, authorizes the launch. The order is transmitted through secure military channels to the Aerospace Force of the Revolutionary Guard, the branch of the Iranian armed forces responsible for ballistic missiles. 3 launch teams, each in a different location to maximize the chances that at least one completes the launch before being destroyed, receive their orders. The targets have been carefully selected. They're not military targets. Iran knows its 3 nuclear weapons are not enough to destroy Israel's military capabilities. So it aims at something more terrifying. It aims to eliminate Israel as a nation. The first target is Tel Aviv, the economic, cultural, and population center of Israel, a city of approximately 400,000 inhabitants in the central municipality, but with a metropolitan area of more than 3 million people. More than 30% of Israel's population lives in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. The second target is Jerusalem, the capital, the political center, and the holiest place for 3 religions. Population of approximately 900,000. The third target is Haifa, the 3rd largest city, the main northern port, industrial center. Population of approximately 280,000. 3 cities, 3 missiles. The intention is clear. It is not a military attack. It is an attempted genocide to erase Israel from the map. At 3:05 in the morning, Tehran time, which is 2:35 in the morning in Israel, the first Shahab-3 missile is launched from a location in the mountains of western Iran. Israel's early warning systems, among the most advanced in the world due to decades of missile threats, detect the launch within seconds. American satellites also detect the launch almost instantly. The information arrives simultaneously at the Kiryat, Israel's military command center in Tel Aviv, and at the Pentagon in Washington. At 2:36 in the morning in Israel, air raid warning sirens begin sounding throughout the country. The cellular alert system sends messages to all mobile phones in Israel. Emergency message. Missile attack. Seek shelter immediately. Israelis, after decades of living under the threat of rocket attacks from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, know the protocol. They have between 30 seconds and 2 minutes to reach a shelter, depending on their location. But this is not a normal rocket. Radar systems calculate the trajectory. A ballistic missile, not multiple small rockets. A single large missile. From Iran, estimated flight time, 12 minutes. Israel's missile defense system activates automatically. Israel has the most sophisticated missile defense system in the world, developed specifically for this scenario. The Arrow 3 system is designed to intercept ballistic missiles outside the atmosphere. Arrow 2 intercepts in the upper atmosphere. David's Sling intercepts short and medium-range missiles. Iron Dome intercepts rockets and artillery projectiles. For a ballistic missile from Iran, Arrow 3 is the first line of defense. At 2:38, 2 minutes after the Iranian launch, an Arrow 3 missile launches from a base in central Israel. Its objective is to intercept the Shahab-3 during its mid-course flight phase, when it is in space, before it begins its terminal descent toward the target. At 2:40, radar systems detect 2 additional launches from Iran. 3 missiles, not 1, 3. The Israeli command center immediately understands. This is not a conventional attack. 3 ballistic missiles from Iran. There is only one possible explanation. They are nuclear. The Prime Minister of Israel is awakened and taken to an underground command bunker. He is informed. 3 ballistic missiles from Iran. Trajectories indicate targets in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. Highly probable they are nuclear. Time until impact, 9 minutes. Arrow system attempting intercept. The Prime Minister has approximately 5 minutes to make a decision. Does he wait to confirm if the missiles are really nuclear? Or does he assume the worst case and authorize immediate nuclear retaliation? Israel has its own nuclear doctrine, although it has never been officially declared. It is a policy of deliberate ambiguity. Israel never confirms nor denies having nuclear weapons. But all serious analysts estimate that Israel between 80 and 400 nuclear weapons deployed on Jericho missiles, on Dolphin submarines capable of launching nuclear cruise missiles, and possibly on aircraft. Israeli doctrine, according to external analysts, includes the concept known as the Samson option. If Israel faces existential destruction, it will use its nuclear weapons to ensure its enemies do not survive either. The Prime Minister makes the decision. If the missiles are really nuclear and interception fails, Israel will have minutes before being destroyed. There is no time for extensive deliberation. He authorizes preparation for nuclear retaliation, but he also orders an attempt at emergency communication with Washington, because what Israel is about to do will change the world forever. At 2:42 in the morning in Israel, which is 6:42 in the evening on Sunday on the U.S. East Coast, the American president receives an emergency call. The National Security Advisor informs him. Israel is under ballistic missile attack from Iran. 3 missiles. Israel believes they are nuclear. Israeli defense system attempting interception. But Israel is preparing nuclear retaliation. The president orders activation of the White House Situation Room, establishes direct communication with the Israeli Prime Minister. The conversation lasts less than 2 minutes. The Prime Minister informs the situation. 3 missiles, possibly nuclear. If interception fails, millions of Israelis will die. Israel will respond with total nuclear force against Iran. The American president responds. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself. If the missiles are nuclear, the United States will consider this an attack not only against Israel, but against the established international order, and will respond accordingly. But the president also asks, wait for confirmation. Give the Arrow system time. If they intercept the missiles, there is space for a response different from nuclear. The Prime Minister responds with a single word. Minutes. We have minutes. At 2:45 in the morning in Israel, the first Arrow 3 missile intercepts the Iranian Shahab 3 heading to Tel Aviv. Impact occurs at more than 100 kilometers altitude, outside the atmosphere. Interception is successful. The Iranian missile is destroyed, but the explosion reveals something terrifying. There is a flash of gamma radiation. Sensors detect radioactive particles. The missile was carrying a nuclear warhead. Confirmation is instantaneous. Iran has just launched a nuclear attack against Israel. 2 more missiles are still in flight. At 2:46, a second Arrow intercepts the Shahab 3 heading to Jerusalem. Also successful. Also confirms nuclear warhead. But the third missile, heading to Haifa, present a problem. The first Arrow launched against it missed the interception. A second Arrow is immediately launched. But time is critical. The Iranian missile is beginning its terminal descent phase. At 2:47 and 30 seconds, the second Arrow impacts the third Shahab 3. Interception occurs at only 15 kilometers altitude. Technically successful. The missile is destroyed. But when a nuclear missile is destroyed during its descent, there's a risk that the warhead, although it does not fully detonate, may suffer what is called partial fission or radioactive dispersal. In this case, the warhead does not detonate with its full 20 kiloton yield, but a partial fission reaction does occur, an explosion equivalent to approximately half a kiloton, and the dispersal of radioactive material over a wide area. The explosion occurs at 15 kilometers altitude over Haifa Bay. It is not enough to destroy the city, but the electromagnetic pulse affects electronic systems in a radius of 30 kilometers. And the radioactive fallout that falls over Haifa in the following hours contaminates parts of the city. Initial estimates suggest the radiation will kill hundreds or thousands of people in the following weeks. Not the millions who would have died with a full detonation. But it is enough. Iran has attacked Israel with nuclear weapons. And although Israel's defense worked largely, it was not perfect. Haifa is contaminated. There are casualties. And now Israel must respond. At 2:50 in the morning in Israel, the Prime Minister authorizes nuclear retaliation. There is no debate, no additional deliberation. Iran attempted to eliminate Israel with nuclear weapons. Israel will respond. The orders are transmitted to the Israel Defense Forces. Jericho 3 missiles, with range of more than 4,000 kilometers and capable of carrying nuclear warheads, are prepared for launch. Dolphin submarines in the Mediterranean receive orders to prepare nuclear cruise missiles. But before launch, there is a final communication with Washington. The Prime Minister informs the American president. Israel will launch nuclear retaliation against Iran in the next few minutes. The targets will be Tehran, the capital, population 9 million. Qom, holy city for Shiites and location of nuclear facilities, population 1 million. Isfahan, industrial and nuclear center, population 2 million. Tabriz, large northern city, population 1,600,000. Shiraz, important southern city, population 1,500,000. 5 cities, with multiple warheads each. Israel estimates that between 15 and 20 million Iranians will die in the first hours. The American president does not attempt to stop Israel. He knows it is impossible. Israel has just survived an attempted nuclear genocide. Its response is inevitable. Instead, the president informs, the United States will launch its own military response against Iran. Not necessarily nuclear, but massive. The objective is to ensure Iran can never attempt this again. At 2:55 in the morning in Israel, the first Jericho-3 missiles launched from bases in the Negev Desert. 5 missiles, each with multiple nuclear warheads. Flight time to Iran is approximately 12 minutes. Iran does not have a missile defense system capable of intercepting Israeli ballistic missiles. Its S-300 systems, acquired from Russia, are effective against aircraft and cruise missiles, but not against ballistic missiles in terminal descent at hypersonic speeds. Iran is defenseless. At 3:07 in the morning, the first Israeli nuclear warheads impact Tehran. 3 warheads of approximately 100 kilotons each detonate over different parts of the city. The historic center of Tehran, with its mosques, bazaars, and government buildings, is vaporized instantly. The Golston Palace, the Grand Bazaar, the Azadi Tower, everything disappears. In a radius of 5 kilometers from each detonation point, everything is completely destroyed. People, buildings, trees, vehicles, they simply cease to exist. In a radius of 15 kilometers, buildings collapse. The subway crumbles. Roads fracture. Electrical, gas, water lines all break. Massive fires begin simultaneously in thousands of locations. Firestorms merge into a single megafire. Temperatures become so high that asphalt melts. People who survived the initial explosion now face a literal inferno. Approximately 4 million people in Tehran die in the first 30 minutes. Another 2 million will die in the following hours and days from burns, radiation, and collapse of medical infrastructure. Qom, Isfahan, Tabriz, Shiraz all receive similar impacts. In total, approximately 15 million Iranians are dead or dying in the first hour after Israeli retaliation. But Israel is not the only one responding. The United States also acts. At 3 in the morning, Tehran time, which is 6:30 in the evening, U.S. East Coast time, the American president authorizes a massive military operation against Iran. Not a nuclear attack, but a conventional campaign on a scale Iran has never experienced. From aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, dozens of F-18 Super Hornet aircraft take off. From bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, B-52 and B-1 bombers join. From submarines in the Persian Gulf, hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles are launched. The targets are not cities. The United States is not attacking civilian population. The targets are all remaining nuclear facilities of Iran. Natanz, Fordow, Iraq, Isfahan. All are attacked with deep penetration bombs designed to destroy underground bunkers. All military installations of the Revolutionary Guard. Barracks, training bases, weapons depots. All known missile launch sites. All command and control facilities. Military communication centers. Leadership bunkers. All oil refineries and petrochemical plants. To destroy Iran's economic capacity to finance future military operations. The air campaign is the most intense since the Gulf War in 1991. In the first 6 hours, more than 2,000 targets are attacked. Iranian air defenses attempt to respond. S-300 systems launch missiles. Some American aircraft are shot down. But American technological superiority is overwhelming. Stealth F-35 aircraft penetrate defenses without being detected. Cruise missiles fly at low altitude, evading radars. GPS-guided bombs impact with meter precision. In 12 hours, Iran's offensive military capability is destroyed. No functional nuclear facilities remain. No operational missile launch sites remain. No refineries producing fuel remain. Iran, as a regional military power, has ceased to exist. But the consequences of the nuclear exchange between Israel and Iran are not limited to those two countries. The entire Middle East is on fire. Saudi Arabia, Iran's historical enemy, watches with a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because the Iranian threat has been eliminated. Horror because nuclear weapons have just been used in their region. And because the radioactive fallout from the explosions in Iran is being carried by winds eastward toward Pakistan and Afghanistan, and westward toward Iraq and possibly Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government orders massive evacuations in eastern provinces, distributes potassium iodide tablets to protect against radiation poisoning, activates its civil emergency plans. But with millions of people trying to evacuate simultaneously, roads collapse. Turkey, a NATO member, convenes an emergency meeting of the North Atlantic Council. Turkey shares a border with Iran. Radiation will cross that border. Turkey also has a significantly Shiite population that sympathizes with Iran. The Turkish government faces massive internal pressure. On one hand, it is a NATO member and technically a U.S. ally. On the other, the use of nuclear weapons, even in retaliation, generates horror in the Turkish population. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, all are in crisis. Governments attempt to control their populations. There are massive demonstrations, anti-Israeli, anti-American, but there is also panic. Because if nuclear weapons have just been used in the Middle East, who says they will not be used again? Iraq, which shares a long border with Iran, faces the most immediate crisis. Radioactive fallout is falling over eastern provinces. Basra, Iraq's second largest city, is receiving dangerous levels of radiation. The Iraqi government, weak and divided between pro-Iranian and pro-Western factions, collapses into chaos. Iraqi Shiite militias, which have been supported by Iran for years, promise revenge against the United States. Attack American bases in Iraq with rockets and drones. The United States responds with airstrikes. Suddenly, Iraq is on the verge of becoming a complete battlefield again. Lebanon, where Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group, is a dominant political and military force, is an existential crisis. Hezbollah has tens of thousands of rockets pointing at Israel. Will it launch them in revenge for the Israeli nuclear attack against Iran? Israel makes it clear. If Hezbollah launches a massive rocket attack, Israel will respond with total force, possibly including nuclear weapons against Hezbollah's command bunkers in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is in an impossible position. Its sponsor, Iran, has just been destroyed. Launching an attack against Israel would invite its own destruction. But not launching an attack would be seen as cowardice by its own members and sympathizers. The Hezbollah leader makes the decision not to attack. He prefers to survive, to fight another day. But radical elements within Hezbollah do not accept this decision. They launch rockets independently. Israel responds with massive bombing of southern Lebanon. At the global level, the reaction is shock and horror. The United Nations convenes an emergency session of the Security Council. But the meeting is chaotic. Russia and China condemn the use of nuclear weapons, but also condemn what they call American aggression against Iran. The United States argues that Israel acted in legitimate self-defense after being attacked with nuclear weapons, that the response was proportional to the existential threat it faced. France, the United Kingdom, and most European countries express support for Israel, but also deep concern about the use of nuclear weapons. They call for restraint. They call for no further escalation. Arab countries are divided. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, enemy of Iran, express discreet support for Israeli and American actions. But they cannot say it publicly because their populations are furious. Qatar, which has maintained relations with Iran, condemns Israeli and American actions. Pakistan, the only Muslim nuclear power, faces massive internal pressure to respond. Demonstrations in Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore demand that Pakistan use its own nuclear weapons against Israel. The Pakistani government is in crisis. On one hand, it does not want to get involved in a conflict that is not theirs. On the other, public pressure is immense. The Pakistani military puts its nuclear forces on maximum alert, not to attack, but to send a signal, to show that Pakistan will not tolerate further nuclear attacks against Muslim countries. India, Pakistan's historical enemy, watches with alarm as Pakistan has put its nuclear forces on alert. India responds by putting its own forces on alert. Suddenly, the risk of a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, completely unrelated to the original conflict between Israel and Iran, becomes real. China is in a delicate position. It is an economic ally of Iran. It has invested trillions in the Belt and Road Initiative that includes Iran as a critical node. But China also has massive economic relations with the United States, Europe, and even Israel. It does not want to get involved militarily, but it also cannot remain completely silent. China proposes international mediation, offers Beijing as a venue for emergency talks. But talks between whom? The Iranian government, to the extent it still exists, is in underground bunkers. Tehran no longer exists as a functional capital. Russia, an ally of Iran and arms supplier, is in an impossible position. It cannot militarily defend Iran against the United States and Israel without risking direct war with NATO. But it also cannot simply abandon Iran without losing credibility as a global power. Russia issues statements condemning American and Israeli actions, moves military forces toward the Caucasus, near the border with Iran, but does not take direct military action. 24 hours after the initial Iranian nuclear attack, the balance is devastating. In Israel, approximately 2,000 people died directly from the partial explosion and radiation from the warhead that was intercepted over Haifa. Another 5,000 will die in the following weeks from radiation exposure. The city of Haifa is partially evacuated. The most contaminated areas will be uninhabitable for years. But Israel, as a nation, survived. The missile defense system worked. The existential threat was neutralized. In Iran, between 15 and 20 million people are dead. The 5 largest cities in the country are completely destroyed or uninhabitable. The central government has collapsed. Communications are non-existent. Economic infrastructure is destroyed. Iran, as a functional nation-state, has ceased to exist. What remains is fragmentation. Ethnic provinces, the Kurds in the northwest, the Arabs in the southwest, the Baluchis in the southeast, begin to declare autonomy or independence. The country is fragmenting. American military forces have suffered approximately 300 casualties, mainly downed pilots, soldiers at bases in Iraq that were attacked by militias. But militarily, the American operation was a complete success. Targets destroyed. Iranian capacity to threaten the region eliminated. In the rest of the Middle East, civilian casualties from secondary effects are beginning to accumulate. In Iraq, approximately 50,000 people have died from radioactive fallout. In Afghanistan, tens of thousands more. Radioactive fallout is being carried by winds toward Pakistan, where authorities are reporting elevated radiation levels in western provinces. 1 week after the initial attack, the consequences are expanding. The global economy is in total chaos. The oil price has tripled. Iran, which produced approximately 3 million barrels per day, no longer exists as a producer. But more importantly, the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 30% of the world's oil passes, is closed. The remains of the Iranian government, operating from bunkers, have mined the strait as a last act of defiance. Oil tankers cannot pass. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, all try to redirect their exports through alternative routes. But the capacities of alternative pipelines are limited. The result is a global oil shortage. Gasoline prices in the United States reached $10 per gallon. In Europe, 12 euros per liter. Economies that depend on imported oil enter instant recession. Global financial markets have collapsed. Stock markets fell between 40 and 60% in the first week. Investors are terrified. Geopolitical risk is incalculable. The global financial system, already fragile, is on the verge of collapse. Central banks are printing money massively, trying to stabilize markets. But confidence is broken. Global supply chains are disrupted, not just because of oil, but because trade that passed through the Persian Gulf is stopped. Containers stuck in ports. Factories in Asia unable to ship products to Europe or America. Global trade, which had been the basis of a modern economy, is collapsing. Millions of people are being displaced. Refugees from Iran, the few who managed to escape before borders closed, are trying to cross into Turkey, into Pakistan, into Afghanistan. But those countries cannot absorb them. Turkey closes its border, uses military force to stop refugees. The images are horrific. Separated families. People dying in improvised refugee camps in the desert. Diseases are spreading in affected areas. Without functional medical infrastructure, without clean water, without sanitation, diseases like cholera, typhoid, dysentery are killing thousands. In Iran, where hospitals were destroyed, where doctors are dead, where there are no medicines, people injured in the nuclear attacks are dying without treatment. Acute radiation syndrome is killing tens of thousands. The international community attempts to organize humanitarian aid. United Nations, Red Cross, non-governmental organizations. But the scale of the disaster exceeds any response capacity. And the security situation makes it impossible for humanitarian workers to operate. Iran is an active war zone. There are militias fighting. There are ethnic groups trying to control territories. There are bandits looting. No one can enter safely. 1 month after the attack, the situation has stabilized into a new and terrible normal. Iran no longer exists as a unified state. It has fragmented into multiple entities. The government in exile, operating from bunkers and supported by Russia, nominally controls some areas, but has no real power. Iranian Kurdistan has declared independence and is being discreetly supported by Israel and the United States. The southern provinces are controlled by Arab militias. Baluchistan has joined with Pakistani Baluchistan in a de facto independent entity. The death toll in Iran has reached approximately 25 million, not just from the direct nuclear attacks, but from starvation, disease, violence, and total collapse of society. Israel is rebuilding Haifa. The most contaminated areas have been cordoned off. They're using robots to clean radioactive material. But it will take years. The Israeli population is traumatized but relieved. They survive an attempted nuclear genocide. Their defense system worked. But the victory has an enormous psychological cost. The United States has suffered 0 deaths on American territory. But military casualties and operations in the Middle East have reached approximately 1,000. And the economic cost is massive. The global recession caused by the conflict is costing trillions of dollars. The American administration faces criticism. Some argue it should have done more diplomacy before the situation escalated. Others argue the response was appropriate. The political debate is fierce. The global economy is in its worst recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment in the United States reaches 15%. In Europe, 20%. Governments are collapsing. There are massive protests. People are furious. Furious about the war. Furious about the economy. Furious that they feel their leaders failed them. The international system established after World War II is in crisis. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which had limited proliferation for decades, is effectively dead. If Iran could develop nuclear weapons and use them, what prevents other countries from doing the same? Saudi Arabia announces it will initiate its own nuclear program, not just for energy, for weapons. If Iran had the bomb, Saudi Arabia will have it too. Turkey does the same. Egypt seriously considers the option. Suddenly, the Middle East is on the verge of a nuclear arms race. In Asia, South Korea and Japan reconsider their policies of not having nuclear weapons. If the world is so dangerous, why depend on American protection? Why not have their own nuclear deterrence? The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Order that had kept the number of countries with nuclear weapons limited to 9 is collapsing. In a decade, there could be 20 countries with nuclear weapons, or 30. And each new country with the bomb is a new point of failure, a new opportunity for what we just saw to happen. We arrive at the most important part of this analysis. Why is this scenario, although hypothetical, one of the most plausible to occur in the near future? Because, unlike a nuclear war between Russia and the United States, which requires an existential crisis between two rational superpowers with much to lose, a nuclear conflict between Israel and Iran involves actors with less to lose, with deep hostility and decades of history, and with compressed geography that does not give time for reflection. Iran views Israel as an illegitimate state that must be eliminated. It has said so publicly for decades. Israel sees a nuclear Iran as an existential threat it cannot tolerate. It has said it will do whatever necessary to prevent Iran from getting the bomb. These two positions are irreconcilable, and the geography of the Middle East means that missile flight time between the two countries is only 12 minutes. There is no space for calm deliberation, no time for emergency communications. It is decide in minutes or die. The scenario you just heard is based on analysis from dozens of non-proliferation experts, on studies from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, on reports from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and on decades of statements from Israeli, Iranian, and American officials. It is not science fiction. It is a reasonable extrapolation of current tensions. And what is terrifying is that every year that passes, Iran gets closer to having the technical capacity to produce nuclear weapons. Current estimates in 2026 suggest that if Iran decided to completely withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and dedicate all its resources to producing a bomb, it could have one in a matter of months. Not years, months. That means the window to prevent this scenario through diplomacy is closing rapidly. So, what can be done to prevent this scenario? First, serious diplomacy. Not sanctions that collapse economies and radicalize populations, but negotiations that offer Iran a path to normalization in exchange for verifiable limits on its nuclear program. The 2015 agreement was not perfect, but it was better than nothing, and its collapse brought us closer to the scenario you just heard. Second, lines of communication. Israel and Iran do not have diplomatic relations. There is no direct communication channel. Everything must go through intermediaries. This increases the risk of misunderstandings. Channels are needed, even if secret, so that in moments of crisis they can communicate directly. Third, strengthening missile defense systems. As we saw in the scenario, Israel's Arrow system worked. It saved millions of lives. Investing in these systems, sharing technology with allies, can be the difference between surviving and being destroyed. Fourth, pressure on Iran from actors Iran respects. Russia and China have influence over Iran. They must be convinced that a nuclear Iran is not in their interest. That will destabilize the region in ways that will affect their own interests. Fifth, public education. Most people do not really understand what a nuclear conflict means. They do not understand it is not just a bigger bomb. It is the end of entire societies. Videos like this, analysis like this, help create public pressure for governments to take the issue seriously. And sixth, recognize that the definitive solution is the elimination of nuclear weapons. As long as these weapons exist, the risk of them being used exists. Every year without use is another year of luck. But luck runs out. What you just heard is a warning. A detailed map of how political decisions, history, geography, and technology can combine to produce catastrophe. It is not inevitable, but it is possible. And every day that passes without serious diplomatic action, without investment in conflict prevention, without public education about the risks, brings us a little closer. The scenario between Israel and Iran is different from Russia and the United States. It is smaller in scale, but it is more likely. Because the tensions are sharper, the actors have less to lose, and geography does not give time to reflect. 15 to 20 million dead in Iran. Potentially millions in Israel if missile defense fails. Fragmentation of an entire country. Global economic collapse. Nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Risk of secondary nuclear conflicts in Asia. This is not the end of the world like the Russia-United States scenario. but it is the end of the Middle East as we know it, and the waves extend globally. If this video made you think, share it, because the best defense against this scenario is not anti-missile missiles, although they help. It is that people understand exactly what is at stake. It is that voters demand serious diplomacy from their governments. It is that public pressure forces leaders to seek solutions before it is too late. Iran and Israel do not have to be enemies forever. History is full of enemies who became partners. France and Germany fought 3 devastating wars and are now allies. The United States and Japan destroyed each other and are now allies. It can change, but only if there is will, and only if there is time. Thank you for staying until the end. I know it was difficult. I know it was disturbing, but it was necessary. See you in the next analysis.